Hello, and welcome to another Superintendent's Update, our opportunity to talk to Superintendent of Schools Eric Conti about all the latest school news, and of course with the decision about reopening and all the planning going into it, we could have quite a long update, but we're going to try to kind of keep it slightly brief, just to let Dr. Conti get back to all the important decisions he has to make. But Dr. Conti, thanks for joining me.
Thanks, Rich. It's good to be here.
And I wanted to start off with just some news from today. There was a decision at the state level to allow schools to open 10 days later, I guess to give teachers a little bit more time to get prepared. What are your thoughts? What do you think that would be something that we do here in Burlington? Is it mandatory? I don't know all the details yet.
I'm not sure I know all the details yet either, but I do think it is mandatory. The change really doesn't help us in Burlington that much, and I'll try to briefly explain why. It may actually cause us to make some changes, which I'm sure we're going to have to get used to making changes all the time. There are many school districts in Massachusetts that don't have the length of teacher contract that Burlington does, so our teachers work 187 days. We had built in 8 days at the beginning of our school year to provide that on-ramp for teachers in regards to setup and training already. So if imitation is the finest form of flattery, I guess the state was looking to create that model statewide. And I think the state teachers union and the commissioner negotiated this arrangement that the school year would be shortened by 10 days, and those 10 days would be front-loaded at the start of the school year. So I believe there are limitations as to when we can use that. That might delay our start a few days from where we currently had it, because we had 8 days built in, not 10.
Right.
So if we have to use 10, then we're going to delay our start a couple days. I'm still asking for clarification as to whether, again, we are required to use all 10 or whether we can use up to 10, and that type of language. On the positive note, we've been asking the state to make more of these prescriptive decisions for us. We were initially told the state would sort of prescribe our school environments. 85% of our school design would be prescribed by the state. It's much lower than that. It's more like 15%, and there are a lot of decisions being left to localities to make. And not shying away from the decision making, but the hard part is all of our surrounding towns are going through the exact same process. We may have slightly different arrangements. Parents are comparing. You're open 4 days, someone else is open 5 days, someone else is open 2 days. I think had the state said this is the how schools need to look in the fall to return to in-person, that would have helped the process move along, because we also have to bargain all the working condition changes with all of our unions as well moving forward. So there's a lot of moving parts. And we all want our kids to be back in school, and we're all, I think, working towards the same goal. But we just have a lot of details to arrange. And the last-minute changes, like the reduction in the school year 10 days, again, I think while well-meaning, and I think will be helpful. As these changes come up closer and closer to the time that we have to make a decision, it forces us to go back and rethink some of what we feel like we've already have a good plan in place for, we've already decided. So again, I guess I welcome the news. We can use the time, but we really need to stop all the changes.
Yeah, let's get everybody on one page, at least for some amount of time.
Right.
Now I know usually with a lot of decisions, you work with other superintendents. I'm guessing that's happening with this too.
Yeah, almost daily, because we know we're going to be compared, and it would be a challenge. So again, those comparisons are going to exist. So every school building sort of is presenting a slightly different obstacle in regards to providing social distancing. The number of students, the square footage, that is again very individualized. But many of my colleagues are talking again about general in-person hybrid versus full return versus remote. We're having sort of those large picture conversations, so structurally we don't look that different. There may be, again, some building-based specific differences, but we're really trying to say can we try to create a common elementary experience, a common middle school experience, and a common high school experience.
So I know that there's obviously a lot of information. You guys have come up with the plan that the state required, and you were recently here in BCAT to do a presentation on that. People can find that on our website at bcattv.org. It was an hour and a half long, and I know you got into a lot of the details. So what I don't want to do is go through every detail as this, because since you already did it, and I know you'll be doing another one later on this week. So just kind of overview of sort of the structure of the week. I know it's different at the elementary level and the middle and high school level and pre-K as well. Just so, what are some like the big points?
Well, some of the big points are I sort of purposely went about this process a little bit differently than some of my colleagues, so almost in reverse order. So many of my colleagues spent a lot of their early time, early planning, talking about general categories of safety, sort of values. They had planning documents that they released. We really didn't do that. We spent a lot of our time looking at individual schools and schedules. And the reason we did that is I think parents and staff want to know specifics. And so we really tried to get to, we had all the health guidance. What would this potentially look like in a school or for a school day is really the question we wanted to get to. We have to go back and fill in all the health protocols. We have to go back and fill in what transportation is going to look like, what our cleaning schedules are going to be. We would have had to do that work anyway, and I think we need to do that before we survey staff and parents again. I think that those are reassuring, but the answer that I knew I was going to get sort of most frequently is, what is my kid's day going to look like? And so that's really what we tried to answer first, and that required a lot of school-based work. And I want to make sure I give credit to my principals, and they brought in teacher teams to work with them this summer to look at the health guidance and to say what could this possibly look like. Our 4 elementary schools work together, so the schedule looks about the same. And again, we tried to get students back every day because it's really important. The days are shortened because initially we are struggling with how to manage lunch, and it's not just about feeding the kids. We can do that easily. It's about supervising the kids and also providing lunch for our staff, separation for our staff. And so we felt, at least initially, sending the kids home for lunch would be sort of the best strategy. And then if we do what we do well in the first few weeks, first month, maybe we look to add lunch in sort of at a later date. So elementary schools, we're looking to try to get the kids back every day. The feedback from parents, I think that was a really hard age group for parents to do a lot of the teaching with and the instructing with. The students obviously need to be directed through their learning. Middle school and high school, the students are a little bit more independent. Obviously, as you get older in high school, the more independent you are. Maybe the less parents were working directly with students. We also couldn't meet the social distancing guidelines that the state had provided, given the number of students and just the structure of the buildings. So we're looking to go back in a hybrid model, which is some in person and some remote. And we're looking at the middle school and the high school have matching schedules. And we're looking to divide the students in similar ways, potentially starting alphabetically, just so we can try to cluster families together. So it looks like we're going to have a 2 days in person, 3 days remote schedule. And again, that's very common with my colleagues, at least neighboring communities that I've heard of in terms of the limitations of space. Our preschool program, again, is outstanding. Deb Clark is our director. She's working with her families directly to make sure that we can provide the mandated services that we're required to do for our young kids who are disabled, and then really working with families to try to offer as much as we can for our neighborhood children who also attend our preschool as well. But again, that program isn't mandatory, so we have a lot more flexibility with what we're doing. So again, I'd say 5 days a week at elementary, to be general, and then we're looking at a hybrid again, a shortened day at elementary, and then a hybrid at the middle school and high school, where we're some rotation of, it looks like 2 days on and 3 days remote.
Okay. And I know one of the big questions, and something that came out kind of later last week was transportation, just getting the kids to school. What is sort of the latest guidelines from the state?
Latest guidance for the state are very specific. In fact, it's a frustration point for me because it looks like our buses can operate, at around 40% capacity, and that's kind of rough. We might be able to gain a few percentage points because we can cluster families together, but it looks like one kid per seat staggered, assigned seats coming in. We also surveyed parents, and I'm not sure every parent would need to take advantage of transportation. But I think we're really working hard to look at some potential options, maybe limiting transportation. I think one of the challenges in Burlington is people are used to a very high level of service. Every student has a seat on a bus, again, with no transportation fee. I like the no transportation fee, and I'm not indicating that we need to start charging, but it may be at least for the immediate future, given the limitation that anyone who lives within 1.5 miles or 2 miles of school needs to walk. And that's, again, not uncommon across the state. And we're working with the Burlington Police currently to identify safe walking and bike riding routes to school. And there has been, again, the town, to its credit, has done a lot more with installing sidewalks, as I'm sure you've covered at town meeting. So if we have, again, more opportunities for kids to walk, I think that might be something we need to explore. Whether that saves us any costs or not, again, we have to look at later on, but our ability, our capacity to transport students is limited given the regulations that we have. And again, in no way am I suggesting that we have to, again, hire twice as many buses to make up for the capacity loss. We just can't do that.
Right. Would it be possible that you would hire additional lifeguards, just at different points if more kids are walking?
Crossing guards, again, possibly we could do that. Or again, we're working with the Burlington Police, who are, again, wonderful partners, and they're the experts in sort of where's, the traffic impact. If we have 50% of our typical bus riders getting driven to school individually by parents, that's also going to create many more cars on the road during particular commuting times as well. So I just think it's a potential challenge. If we have more demand from families for seats than we have on the bus, do we have to do a lottery? Do we try to identify need? Do we, again, these are all questions that I don't have answers for, but I think we're going to need to explore relatively quickly.
Now, so it's 40% of the total capacity that the bus could hold, right?
Roughly. Again, there's
So my question is, because coming in, we're here in the high school. This is usually a pretty long line of parents picking up their kids or dropping them off. Do you know what percentage is of the buses filled during normal times?
Yeah. So again, almost every seat, or we typically have 3 elementary students to a seat, and the buses are full. We have 17 buses. Middle school uses all the buses. High school, we begin to see a drop-off, especially in the afternoon, because kids either have practice or like riding with their friends. But in a typical morning run, I think we ran the numbers. I think we transport about, again, these are rough numbers, Rich, say 2,600 kids, roughly. And if we were to, that's over 3 runs.
Okay.
So if you we can usually, I think, looking at the new numbers, we can transport around 350 kids a run. So it'll be close to a 50% capacity of sort of what we normally do on a typical morning.
Okay.
And it's the percentages don't work, again, because I think they were looking at 2 kids per seat. Again, for the elementary, we have typically 3 kids per seat. So it's, again, a little bit confusing, but I think we'll probably have about 50% capacity.
Now, I know that the survey that you put out for the parents and teachers was before a lot of this information came out. But just in general, are you hearing from what are some of the the big takeaways? Are most parents hoping for in school? Are there a significant amount that are nervous about it? What are
again, the surveys that we did were a required part of the state's feasibility study, so we had to do some initial surveying. We always knew that we were going to need to follow up with more detailed surveying. Parents, by and large, I think 85% in our initial survey, and we probably had about 1,600 respondents, want to see their kids in some sort of in-person schooling, either hybrid or full return. So again, we hadn't described what hybrid even was, but I think what I would say is a very large percentage of our parents who responded to the survey wanted to see their kids back in school in some capacity. I would say that. I would say the majority of our teachers wanted to return to school in-person instruction in some form of capacity, but they, I think, had a lot of questions, which are natural, about what am I going to be returning to? What are going to be the conditions of my return? So we're hoping to provide more details and more answers for that. And then, again, we have upcoming conversations with the teachers about how we can sort of meet their expectations in terms of safety. Part of the confounding factor for us, to be quite honest, is the national media, national coverage spends a lot of time talking about states that have much higher rates of infection than we do. So they don't ever talk about Massachusetts. They talk about Florida, right, Texas, Arizona, California. To be honest, if we were in any of those states, we wouldn't even be considering opening school. We would, from my perspective, we'd have to be remote. I think one of the things we have to consider in Massachusetts is our low transmission rate, and we can never reduce risk to zero. So again, at what point is that transmission rate going to be acceptable? Again, it's not my area of expertise, but I'm saying I think Massachusetts' particular context is what's allowing us even to consider any sort of in-person start to school.
Right. Yeah, we've gotten the numbers down, the transmission down for the most part. So everybody keep wearing your masks and social distancing. And as far as distancing, is there things that you're going to have to do in the schools to, like different than maybe use different spaces just to make sure you're able to have, some amount of space between the students, like maybe teach in the auditorium, some things like that?
Possibly. So I think we're looking at some of the large spaces that we have in terms of being available. I think part of the importance of our upcoming surveys are going to be to determine who's returning to school if we open and who is going to stay remote. The state is asking that we give families a choice. I think choices are good, but part of the difficulty is planning, because we need that information. We're accountable for a child's instruction, education, whether they say they're going to remain remote or whether they say they're going to participate in our hybrid programming. So we actually have to take attendance every day. That's going to be a requirement. So even if your child is remaining at home or a child is remaining at home with a family, they're going to need to sign in every day. We're going to have to keep track of what they're doing and sort of in their participation. So will we be using additional spaces? The answer is yes. Exactly when and where, I don't know, because we need to have a more exact list of which students are going to be attending and which students are going to be home. Corollary to that is we also have staff. Some staff may have some pre-existing conditions where they have the need to stay home and maybe not come to work, and in working with the doctor and some of the extensions of leave that the federal government has extended to workers may in fact be a group that works from home as well. And so knowing that number is going to be an important factor for us as well when we try to do our fall planning. Again, we need to know who's going to come to work and who's going to stay home, and we need to know which students are going to come to school and which students are going to stay home. So that'll be probably happening in the next 2 weeks, when we're going to be asking for much more detailed information, and we'll be sharing as much as we can about the school environments they'll be entering into, the schedules they'll be experiencing. We figure the more information people have, the more informed choice or the more informed response they'll be able to give us on our surveys.
And as far as working with parents and maybe school nurses, as far as I guess what's the message as far as if your child has a fever, keep them out? Is it just for the duration of the fever, or is it,
all of those rules are going to come out, and
Okay.
I think we're going to need to create a parent handbook for particular to this fall's opening and the pandemic type of context. The state is asking families to do a lot of the screening work prior to the students arriving to school or even getting on the bus. In terms of taking their temperature, the state isn't requiring that. For instance, we don't have to take a child's temperature before they enter a school building. We're asking that parents do that prior to them sending them to school. Part of the challenge is the Department of Education's thresholds and some of the Department of Public Health thresholds are different. Susan Luminello just commented to Patrick Larkin, I think it was today, that we all need to get together because there are some differences, and again, our local Board of Health is going to play a very important part, Rich, in some of these decisions as well. But we need to communicate that to parents carefully. So again, if your child has over 100-degree fever, what do you do? It's not uncommon for kids to have fevers too, so we can't panic every time a kid shows up or spikes a fever. It could be strep throat. There could be a lot of different things, but
Right.
we're going to have a sort of a standardized response protocol for those situations.
And has the decision been made as far as if a student or a teacher in one of the schools that tests positive and they've been in classrooms, is it going to be a shutdown of that school, to keep everyone in that class home? Has that been kind of worked through yet?
The protocols are in place. Now, we haven't necessarily trained everyone on them or communicated them, and I think we again have to work with the local Board of Health and Barbara Conley, our nurse leader, and we have to make sure that we're prepared for those situations. I think one of the environmental factors that we're trying to mitigate some of the closure is by cohorting students. So we're going to try to keep kids in particular classrooms working with particular adults. So if we do have to quarantine a group of people, we're hoping that that group of people can be limited because we wouldn't have the kids mixing as much as they typically would. Again, that's part of the challenge with the after-school program, because if we cohort kids during the school day, but then mix them in the after-school program, and we can't trace who the students have been in contact with, then we might need to shut down more of a school day or more of a school because of that. So we're looking at options to cohort students both during the school day, and if we can have the after-school program running, because I think parents are looking for some extended childcare. If we can provide that, keeping the kids grouped in the same cohorts that they're experiencing during the school day.
And you mentioned the after-school program, but I also want to know, is there, what's on the horizon as far as, extracurricular activities? Will we see band, theater, anything, clubs?
The guidance actually came out Friday night for some of the specialist classes. So they can happen, they just have to happen in a fairly structured and regulated environment. So I won't go through all of it with you, but band instruments, just because that's an important activity for many of our students, they're encouraging or basically saying it has to happen outside if it happens, and the students need to be at least 10 feet spaced 10 feet apart. You obviously can't wear a mask when you're playing a woodwind instrument or
Sure.
a brass instrument, so they have strict regulations there. The singing, again, is also something that they have some contextual safeguards in place. I think the spacing needs to be greater. I think they're encouraging, if the kids are singing, that occur outside. And I think there are other rules. So we are determined to have our students experience specials. We think that's a really important part of their educational experience. And so we're working with our content experts to make sure that we can deliver those specials in a safe way.
Okay. And same kind of on the similar track, I know athletics obviously an important thing. We had, Robert's been doing some reporting on this for us. But what is sort of right now? I know things are kind of up in the air, but
They are, and the state's sort of athletic association, the MIAA, is involved in working with the state. I think they've classified different sports as being sort of low, medium, and high risk. I think the low risk sports are more likely to run. So can we have a cross country season? Possibly. I think we can. Can we have a golf season? Again, if that's a low impact sport and we can maintain social distancing, I'm assuming there are many adults who are golfing today, so that might be something that we can run. Football, again, is a very high risk sport. Probably won't be running any of the high risk sports right away anyway.
yeah. And last thing, in the springtime when, everything kind of shut down immediately, very suddenly, and you had to switch over to remote learning, there was a lot of, not concerned or complaints that it wasn't working out that well. I'm guessing that for the portions of the high school week that will be remote learning, and if we have to go to full remote learning, that it'll be different than that, more planned out.
Substantially different. So I think, I know there was some dissatisfaction with the spring remote learning. What I will say is we met the state requirements for what they expected us to do in the spring. So again, that maybe didn't reach people's expectations, but we were certainly meeting the requirements or what was asked of us by the state. Those requirements again were released last Friday. And the remote learning expectations are much different than they were in the spring. And I'll give you several concrete examples. We're required to take attendance. Grading is required. New content is required. And more synchronous time, more live teacher time and students are also required. So I think what you'll end up seeing and what we're trying to design is a hybrid schedule that can be translated easily to a remote schedule, because one of our concerns is if we start even partially in person, again, as we mentioned at the high school and middle school, 2 days a week, 3 days remote. In 2 weeks, if the virus spikes, we could shut down our buildings again and then go full remote. So they want us to be able to move between sort of an in-person and a remote situation relatively easily. So we're trying to look at schedules that align and match up and meet that. But I want to make sure I answer your question. The remote expectations in the fall are much different, much more rigorous than the remote expectations the state had for us in the spring.
Yeah, well, in the spring, everyone was sort of caught off guard and sort of thrown into a situation. So I think there should be some, understanding and patience for what the teachers were doing. So that's all I have for today. Well, I could go on, like I said, a lot more, but I know we have another information session with you coming up, and I'm sure we'll be doing this again as we move forward. So a lot of decisions to be made, and
Sure.
and I appreciate you taking all the time to come share your thoughts.
We're just some timing, and I know time is precious, but our rough draft sort of remote plans that resulted from the feasibility study the state required to do this Friday. They're asking that districts not make a decision about the fall prior to August 10th. So we're probably looking at the middle part of August when we choose a pathway. We have lots of conversations with our unions to do between those dates, between the middle of August and now. We have a lot of planning to do. We have lots of parent feedback sessions that need to occur. And then we also have some surveying to do in that time as well. There's a tendency to say, oh, the buildings are closed or nothing's happening in schools right now. I just do want to say that there are many people who have been working throughout the closure, throughout the summer. Our custodial staff, our maintenance staff, again, our support staff, our secretarial staff have been really working hard. We have a lot of teachers participating in planning meetings. Our administrators, the administrative team in the district has just been outstanding and just working tirelessly to try to create some sort of semblance of normalcy, and I'll use quotes there, some sort of in-person opportunities for kids in the fall. So I just want to make sure I just express gratitude to those groups. It may seem like there's, not a lot going on, but people are putting in a tremendous amount of time and really trying to create safe environments for the kids to return to.
Excellent. And like I said, as those decisions continue to be made, you're always welcome to come here at BCAT and share all the information with the public. So
You're an important part of our communication plan, so thank you.
well, thank you.